Children have been an important part of the labor force throughout human history, but in the 19th century, this became a problem due to industrialization as children were exposed to dangerous working conditions. Employers, however, seen a benefit in hiring children. They can pay them less for longer hours, they were easier to control, less likely to unionize, and children were smaller. They were able to use machines that were too small for adults to use and were able to fit into smaller spaces. Children as young as the age of 5 were being hired to work, and most were often left sick, injured, or deformed. Now, why would parents send these children to work knowing the dangerous environments that they would be in? With wages being so low for adults, most families didn't have a choice but to send their children to work so that they could support their family. So who was working to try and end child labor? The National Child Labor Committee was formed in 1904 with the mission of promoting the rights, awareness, dignity, well-being, and education of children and youth as they relate to work and working. They wanted to first gather data and evidence to fight against child labor. In 1908, they hired Lewis Hine, a teacher and professional photographer designed in sociology. He advocated photography to document child labor in American industry. Over the next 10 years, he would publish thousands of pictures that would pull at the nation's heartstrings. The National Child Labor Committee wanted to petition state legislatures to pass minimum age laws to stop child labor, which was very difficult because each state had their own laws. They also wanted to advocate for federal law to end child labor. One of the founding members of the movement, Florence Kelley, once said, "Never again can it be a matter of merely local concern what hours the children are working. They will be the republic when we are dead, and we cannot leave it to the local legislators here and there to decide unobserved what sort of citizens shall be produced in this or that state, whether they shall be strong in body, mind, and character, or whether they shall grow up enfeebled by work in early childhood." The shift was from state laws over to federal laws. The National Child Labor Committee started to produce posters and pamphlets to convince people to advocate and be against child labor. John Spargo also wrote a book called The Bitter Cry of the Children in 1906 that described the brutal working conditions for child laborers. The books and information like this would try to push for the end of child labor. A line from the book says, "I once stood in a breaker for over half an hour and tried to do the work of a 12-year-old boy was doing after that day, for 10 hours at a stretch for 60 cents a day. The gloom of the breaker appalled me. Outside the sun shone brightly, the air was pellucid, and the birds sang in chorus with the trees and the rivers. Within the breaker there was blackness, clouds of deadly dust enfolded everything. The harsh, grinding roar of the machinery and the ceaseless rushing of coal through the chutes filled the ears. I tried to pick out the pieces from slate from hurrying stream of coal, often missing them. My hands are bruised and cut in a few minutes. I was covered from head to foot with coal dust, and for many hours afterwards I was expectorating some of the small particles of anthracite that I had swallowed." It was passages and descriptions like that that really pushed for the end of child labor, showing everyone what kind of environment these kids really worked in. Over the next 20 years, many organizations investigate child labor abuses and continue to push for state legislation to take children out of the workforce and put them in schools. In 1916, the Keating-Owing Act banned sales of products from factories, shops, and sanitarily that employ children under the age of 14. From any minor employed children under the age of 16, and from any facility that had children under the age of 16 work at night for more than 8 hours during the day. But unfortunately, in 1918, the Supreme Court ruled that the act was unconstitutional. So again, in 1918, the Revenue Act placed a federal tax of 10% of all goods within the use of child labor. But again, In 1922, the Supreme Court ruled that the act was unconstitutional because it was abuse to the government's right to tax. Once again, Congress tried again with a child labor amendment in 1924, which would give Congress the power to regulate workers under the age of 18, but the amendment did not pass through enough states to be ratified, and some states never even voted on it. Finally, in 1938, President D. Franklin Roosevelt signed a Fair Labor Standards Act, which restricted child labor and protects workers to this day.